What a wonderful opportunity to have us all here today. And I'm not sure about some of you here, but I come a long way to get here today. I was born in La Habana, Cuba, in October 6, 1956, and so I go way back. In 1960, we immigrated here to the United States, my mom, my father, and the four of us kids. And something that I had to learn quickly was how to speak English, because I was finding myself saying all the wrong things at the wrong time. And so eventually I was able to start learning how to say the wrong things better, or maybe I would just started saying the right things correctly. But in either case, I had a typical high school experience where I was involved in sports and, of course, clubs and those kind of things there. And these are all part of the things that started getting us going. My senior year, a recruiter from then High Point College came to see me, and he told me about the wonderful attributes of High Point College. 1,250 students at that time, by the way, and now it's like 5,400. And he also told me about how wonderful North Carolina was, and being that I was a true Southerner from southern La Habana, Cuba, I'm sorry, Cuba. Is that a better way of saying it? Decided to head north. So I got my VW bug and drove up to High Point, North Carolina. And August of 1975, I had a chance to meet a lot of people. At that time, I also met my best friend, which you've heard him mention earlier, Paul Lassard. We became fast friends, and early on, he helped me get out of a lot of troubles, and I helped him. And so through the years, we continued to do that favor for each other. Our wives look at each other and go, "You at it again?" But anyway, it's been a lot of fun. And those first years of college, I was indestructible. I could go through brick walls. Nothing could hold me back. Then the summer before my senior year, I tore my ACL during playing a summer soccer game. And as a result, I wasn't able to play my final year of soccer. So that was kind of a bummer. And so at that point, I started saying, why me? Why did I have to have this happen? So in 1980, I married my classmate, and Debbie Dorland, and to this day she has been my favorite wife of 39 years and my partner as well. She keeps asking me, favorite? Am I the only one? Well, you are my favorite, dear. We joined a local church and started a contract furniture business. We raised 3 wonderful, healthy kids. It's such a blessing to have children. Again, I was feeling indestructible. In 1992, the SBA voted our business as a Small Business of the Year. In 2008, the U.S. Department of Commerce voted us as the leading exporter of the year. 3 times the Tribe Business Journal said we were one of the 50 fastest growing companies in the area. I mean, again, all these blessings and accolades, which are, I guess, wonderful, but in the scheme of things, they're just things. Move forward to October of 2014, and I felt a pain in my lower back while I was trying to do cardio tennis one morning. I was never a very good tennis player. And I just shrugged it off as being tension, so I tried going to a chiropractor. Are there any chiropractors here? Good. Because after 3 times, it didn't work. And so at that point, I went and saw my general practitioner, and he took x-rays, and he said, "Have you been in a car accident, or have you fallen?" And I go, "No." And he says, "Okay, well, we need to send you to an orthopedic surgeon." It's kind of ironic. At that point, I went back to the same orthopedic surgeon in the same firm that had done 3 previous operations. Yeah, I had 2 other operations after the first one. I never learned. And of course, he said after the x-rays, he said, "Do you see these white vertebrae?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Those are good vertebrae." "And you see these gray ones over here?" "Yes." He says, "Well, that's cancer. You have something called multiple myeloma." So I learned then how terrible and how someone's bedside manner could be really pretty bad. That was definitely an example of what not to do for any of the doctors in the house here, to not use that same example. This totally, destroyed my attitude of how things were going at that time, and it blew me away. And when I called my wife to let her know about what happened, what the finding was, of course, it drove her to tears. An appointment was scheduled with an oncologist for the following week, and upon visiting, he advised her not to worry, stay calm. There's a lot of options here. We don't need to overreact at this point here. We just need to do some more x-rays, and we'll find out there's options and so forth. This immediately put my wife and myself at ease, which I think was real important. We were saying that we were dealing with a doctor who was knowledgeable and compassionate, a doctor who was looking out for our best interests. Upon our second visit, he did come back and say, "I'm sorry, it is multiple myeloma, But again, don't forget we have options here. And he said he'd treat me, but he said that this type of cancer was very tricky and it would come back in disguise. He said a better option would be to go ahead and contact one of the 3 university hospitals here in North Carolina. And after consulting about that, my wife and I chose Wake because it was only 30 minutes away from our home instead of an hour-plus drive to the other 2. So at that point, Dr. Chinnasamy got on his own cell phone, and not with the help of an assistant or having my administrative assistant take care of this, he called the Wake Oncology Department himself. And again, you can see what good bedside manner is. He put our thoughts and minds at ease. At the same time, he was going that extra mile to show how much he cared for me and my wife as a patient. Moving forward, on October 9th, 2016, we went and visited Wake Forest, where I advised of the test program, and we had a CT scan and told us about the plan. We left, had lunch, and my wife went back home, and I went back to work. Later on that day, around 4:30, I get a call, and it was the oncologist from Wake, and she says, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm at work. She says, "Well, can you come here right away? You need to come prepared to stay overnight." And of course, that was the extent of the conversation, so I called my wife. I said, "Let's go over to Wake." At that point, we got in the car and went over there, and they immediately started doing additional tests and all these additional things like this, and before you know it, they took me to a room right prior to midnight, and I said, the 12 hours ago it was already past. I'm getting kind of hungry. Can I get something to eat? And they said, no, there's no time for that. It's almost midnight. So at that point, I'm thinking, who knows what's going to be going on the next day? And I go to sleep, and next thing you know, 6 o'clock came kind of early, and so all these nurses and attendants come in. They start prepping me for something, and I said, wait a second. What's going on? He says, "We're prepping you for radiation." It turns out the CT scan, it found that the cancer had totally covered my T9 and T10 vertebrae, and they were concerned that the cancer was going to sever my spine. And so that's why they said, don't move too quickly and get here in a hurry. The next 6 months were filled with 10 rounds of radiation and 36 rounds of chemotherapy. And basically they were trying to treat those, in particular, those 2 vertebrae. The chemo was pretty tough. They started out doing chemo on 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that would proceed for 2 weeks. And then we'd have a week off to be able to recover and get strong. And then we'd start the whole regimen again, all told about 36 rounds. As things went on, it started getting a little better. But let me just paint a picture. Chemo, for some of you that have been through it, you know what I'm going to be talking about. But what's wrong with this picture when you see a nurse putting on a hazmat suit, she's putting on gloves, and she's wearing a full facial shield. And then she takes the needle and then puts it into your port or your injection. And meanwhile, she doesn't want to touch it, but it's okay to put it in you. So that's how strong some of this chemo is. So again, why me? Anyway, things got better. I got to the point where the cancer had gotten down to the lowest level, and I had a chance to ring the victory bell. And I really felt at that point, hey, I'm on my way. I'm getting better. But Tuesday morning, 2016, on January 19th, I woke up feeling terrible, and I fell when I was trying to go to the bathroom that morning. And my wife was out walking the dog, and she heard me fall and hit the bathroom tile floor when I hit the floor the second time. And of course, at that point, she called Wake and called the kids to try to get me together. And so we went on to Wake, and what they found is a cancer had returned to my entire body at that point. And for 8 days, I was at Wake and didn't know who or where I was. About the 5th day, I started being a little bit more coherent. I started getting a better idea of what's going on, and I turned to my oncologist and I said, "What's up, Doc?" I kept thinking of Bugs Bunny at the time, but she said, I needed to discuss it with my team. What had happened was that I had come down with the worst type of multiple myeloma, and something that they hadn't seen before at that time. On the 6th day, I started again with questions, and what they did at that point, they started me on new rounds of chemo. Essentially, they were treating me with a series of Cytoxan, Velcade, and dexamethasone. Names don't sound very good, and they didn't feel real well. This was followed by about a month later, where they then went 24 hours for 5 days in a row, where they were constantly giving me VD paste, which is another chemo cocktail that's put together. The whole idea for this was to prepare me for the purpose of getting my own stem cells transplanted back to me. They had raised the stem cells prior to my being discharged, so they had stored them in a freezer, I think a Whirlpool freezer at Wake Forest. So everything was set to go forward. At that point, as things were getting better, the cancer levels were going down, everything was just set up to be able to have the transplant done at Wake the following week. But then my insurance company stepped in, something that probably affects all of us when it concerns these things with medicine. And they said, we don't have an arrangement to have the procedure done at Wake, you're going to have to go to Duke. And it didn't matter how many times I tried making telephone calls or pleading my case, they said, no, we don't have an arrangement there, you need to go to Duke. My concern was that it was going to be more tests, more chemo, and before you know it, it'd be another 6 months would go by and still nothing would happen. In the end, the insurance company won. They didn't budge, so I needed to go to Duke. In my initial visit to Duke, I met Dr. Christina Gasparotto, who since 1999 had only been working with multiple myeloma oncology patients. So she was arguably the nation's, if not the world's, most competent or most experienced oncology doctor with multiple myeloma. And the funny thing is she told me about that I had had the worst type of multiple myeloma and that Wake had done everything properly, but they just weren't prepared for what had happened to me. She said that in her Italian broken English, in addition to your bone marrow being bad, your blood is crap. And to this day, I find humor in that because, again, we all have had a struggle with accents and dialects, but to this day I'll remember that because I found humor in that, but at the end of the day, she was right. So she told me that she could give me my stem cells back, but ultimately I might only have 2 or 3 good months. So instead of going that route, she said I was out of time and I needed to think outside the box. And that's when she said that I needed to consider doing an allotransplant, where it was finding a donor to be able to give their stem cells to me. So at that point, again, she's the expert. I said, well, I've got no other choice, let's go for it. And so at that point, we checked my sister, my 2 brothers, and they weren't a good match. And then they then went to the U.S. Blood Bank, and they found several donors that were 8 out of 10 match, which I wouldn't have survived that. There's about a 30% mortality rate just going through that procedure. And finally, they went to the International Blood Bank, and they found a 33-year-old female who, through the grace of God, just decided she wanted to share part of herself with another, and she was a 10 for 10 match. And during that time, since the patient, the donor, had to prepare to be able to grow the stem cells in her, my 2 oncologists, the one from Wake, and of course Dr. Gasparotto, had gotten together, and since they figured they'd already compromised my own quality of life, that it would probably be easier for me to continue going to Wake and have my maintenance chemo done there, so I wouldn't have to drive the additional 30, 40 minutes to go to Duke, and I was only about 30 minutes to Wake. So during that time, I would meet regularly with my Wake oncologist, and she would say, George, don't do this, it's too dangerous. There's other options. And I said, what is that? She says, well, you could continue taking chemo. And I said, that's not an option. So on Saturday, September 3rd, 2016, I entered the 9th floor of Duke North Hospital. I immediately began 6 days of 24 around-the-clock chemotherapy. I was taking a combination of caramestine and melaphalin. I can't even pronounce these names. One 4-hour med would end and they'd come back with another one. It was just one after the other, again, constantly going. During that time, I had lost about 41 pounds. I was just a shell of my former self. I had no immunities. I just had blood flowing in my body, and I was totally contagious to whatever might come by. So during that time, I tried to continue, and from door to door on each side of the hall, going back 13 times was 1 mile. So sometimes I couldn't even complete 2 or 3 trips back and forth. Other times, I was able to push and go a little further and complete a mile and then some. Finally, on Friday, September 9th, a nurse brought in a small Ziploc bag containing my guardian angel's bone marrow. About 4 million stem cells were inside that bag, and without any fanfare, the nurse placed the bone marrow into my port, and about 30 minutes later, I had a new bone marrow system. After 11 days, the stem cells started creating new red and white blood cells, and so it worked. It was one of the worst things that would have happened if you try to kickstart a car and it doesn't start, but with your bone marrow system, that was my one chance. I spent 30 days under the direct care of Duke north, an additional 70 days as an outpatient. And what would happen, my wife would take me in every morning, they would do blood work, and then at that point, this is where the real scientists were coming in. They would add potassium one day, magnesium the next day, and you could see they were just tweaking it, trying to keep my levels and trying to get me back to what we considered more normal. Occasionally there was some graft versus host, and that's where my bone marrow was actually fighting my body because it was possibly rejecting it. But basically was able to get through those. On Monday, December 12, 2016, I was finally released and went home. I was drained, I was thankful, I was elated, and I was eager to finally restart my life. Many things had changed in me, but the world, everything moves on. On September 6, 2017, my wife and I went to dinner in Winston-Salem. We were going to celebrate our 36th wedding anniversary, and it was also 3 days short from my 1-year anniversary from having my transplant. And as we stopped at a light, I went, "Whoa," and she said, "What?" And I said, "I haven't been here in 20 years. And of course, my wife being the loving lady she is, "How can you remember 20 years ago when you can't remember what you had for lunch yesterday?" Which is true. But I said at that point, 20 years ago, I stopped at this very same light, and I went to visit my then neighbor who was dying of cancer at Forsyth Hospital. She sadly passed away a few weeks later. Why me? Why did she die, and why did I live? She was a wonderful woman, wife and mother, who died, and she left a lonely husband and 2 motherless daughters. Cancer doesn't discriminate. It'll strike silently and indiscriminately and alter the lives of not only the affected, but all those around. I celebrated my 3rd year since my transplant on September 9, 2019. In between, I dealt with several more bouts of GVH and some other issues, but essentially, I've recovered. To this day, I'm cancer-free and living my life fully, but always aware that multiple myeloma might be sneaking up behind. But you can't look back, you got to look forward. What I can remember, I went through 20 radiation treatments, 58 plus chemotherapy treatments, 7 MRIs with and without dye, 3 CT scans, 2 PET scans, 1 endoscopy, 3 kyphoplasties. Thank God for Elmer's glue. They were able to glue my bones together. 8 bone marrow biopsies and several other procedures that fortunately I can't remember what those were. All in all, I did learn my experience. My battle with multiple myeloma cancer was all my vertebrae were crushed and compressed, and now I'm about 2 inches shorter. I had to buy all new clothes. I can't crash through brick walls anymore, but getting a little older, I've learned that I now look for a door. My blood type changed from my A positive to my donor's O positive. And in this time of the Me Society, what I did learn is that people are very loving, caring, and not entirely interested in hearing all the bad news they hear all the time on TV. People want to help and lift each other up. Most of the doctors and nurses in attendance in the hospital were truly amazing. Each seemed to have their own reason why they got involved in oncology care. Whether they had lost a mother, father, a family member, friend, they all were committed to helping. I'm so glad that you and they have chosen to continue this fight. You've heard me use the expression several times, why me? My dear friend Paul shared with me several times, why not me? I'm no better than anybody else, but the fact is every year over 32,000 Americans contract multiple myeloma cancer. I was more fortunate than the over 12,000 that die every year of multiple myeloma and the thousands more that die of other cancers. My journey taught me a real life lesson in this power of time and prayer. We don't know how much time we have or how little time we have. And one of the greatest gifts that we can give to another is the gift of prayer and lifting them up. Dr. Anita Quabain, president here of High Point University, said I'd be lifted up by 1,000 angels, and I was. I received cards and letters from every member of the staff here at High Point. That gave me more strength and encouragement to keep going on. I want to thank all the medical field for their continued effort to help all those afflicted with the many different types of cancer. I want to thank Dr. Chinnasamy for getting all these talented people here together and getting this going to help all others. And I also want to thank him for getting me started in my road to recovery. Thank God for you all. God's blessings to you and your family, and thank you very much.